to the establishment of the National Park Service. The legislation, sponsored by Congresswoman Spear of California, was considered by the Committee on Natural Resources in May. I commend my colleague, Congresswoman Spear, for introducing this legislation and her leadership on this issue, and we strongly support this legislation. And I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Ohio continues to reserve. The gentleman from the Northern Mariana Islands is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, at this time I yield to the Congresswoman from California, the sponsor of this legislation, Congresswoman Spear, as much time as she may consume.
The gentlewoman from California is recognized for as much time as she wishes to consume.
Mr. Speaker, thank you, and I thank my friend from the Northern Mariana Islands for yielding. I rise today in support of this legislation, the Buffalo Soldiers in National Park Study Act, which will allow the Department of Interior to study the role of Buffalo soldiers and how they defended our first national parks. This is a key step in preserving the legacy of the Army's 1st African American Infantry and Cavalry units and the contributions they made to our nation. This bill will evaluate the feasibility of a national historic trail along the Buffalo Soldiers' route from their historic military posts in the San Francisco Presidio to Yosemite and Sequoia National Parks. The study will also identify properties that could be listed in the National Register of Historic Places or designations as National Historic Landmarks. For several years, Buffalo Soldier regiments traveled 320 miles along this route to patrol the parklands for loggers and poachers, build new trails, and escort visitors. The Buffalo Soldiers were among our very first park rangers, a challenging task these troops took on with pride after serving bravely in the Civil War. Because of the color of their skin, the Buffalo Soldiers were all too often marginalized, and instead of respected for their service to our nation, both on and off the battlefield. However, during their time protecting the parks, they not only confronted racism and discrimination, they overcame it. They became respected neighbors and friends to people living in the park regions, and they made real inroads towards racial progress that were extraordinary for their day. Although they were assigned to watch over government property for only a relatively short time, the Buffalo Soldiers helped lay the groundwork for some of our greatest wilderness to be preserved forever. I'm proud that the Buffalo Soldiers traveled through my district on their way to the parks, and I believe this bill will help shine a light on the history they made in the great state of California and in many places across the country. All Americans from all walks of life would benefit from learning about this often overlooked chapter in our history. The Buffalo Soldiers' story is ultimately about the triumph not just of African American troops over prejudice and injustice, but about the movement of our nation towards a more tolerant and courageous society. I thank my colleagues for supporting this bill, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, may I ask if the Minority Bill Manager has any additional speakers? We do not.
Mr. Speaker, I do not, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back.
Mr. Speaker, with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1022? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended.
Mr. Speaker, on that I ask the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. Now. For what purposes? For what purposes does the gentleman from Wisconsin seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 3800.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 3800, a bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to extend the funding and expenditure authority of the Airport and Airway Trust Fund, to amend Title 49 United States Code, to extend authorizations for the Airport Improvement Program, and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Petri, and the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Costello, each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks, including extraneous material on the bill H.R. 3800.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to include in the congressional record the exchange of letters between the Committee on Ways and Means, the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure concerning H.R. 3800.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman's recognized.
Pleased to report that we are currently in the final negotiations of completing an FAA reauthorization bill with the Senate, with only a few open issues left to be resolved. I'm confident that we will be able to complete negotiations and produce a conference report in the very near future. However, given the congressional schedule and the limited legislative days before FAA's current authority expires, we will not be able to consider the final agreement on the conference report until February. Since current funding expires at the end of this month, it's necessary for us to pass a clean, short-term extension of the FAA's funding and programs through February 17th at current funding levels. This extension is a prudent precaution to ensure that the FAA is able to continue its funding and programs while negotiations are completed and the House and Senate consider the FAA conference report. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Wisconsin reserves. The gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 3800, the Airport and Airway Extension Act of 2012. This bill contains a clean extension of the Federal Aviation Administration's authority to spend from the Airport and Airway Trust Fund and to carry out airport improvement projects at current funding levels through February 17, 2012. Mr. Speaker, this short-term extension will hopefully provide us enough time for the House Republican leadership to finally appoint conferees to the FAA reauthorization bill, which we passed almost a year ago, work through the remaining policy issues with the other body, and send a comprehensive bill to the President. Although this has been an unnecessarily difficult and controversial process during the first session of the 112th Congress to move the multi-year FAA reauthorization measure, I am pleased the House and Senate leadership recognize the importance of getting a bill completed and stepped in to help in the process. While I reserve judgment on a final conference report, it appears as though we are making progress, and we certainly need to avoid a repeat of the disastrous outcome that occurred this summer when the FAA was partially shut down for 2 weeks, costing taxpayers almost $400 million in lost revenue for infrastructure investment. As we move to conference, we need to enact a fair and comprehensive bill that creates jobs, furthers aviation safety, and advances our transition to the next generation air transportation system. Mr. Speaker, I support this short-term FAA extension in the interest of preventing another FAA shutdown in order to give us a few more weeks to produce a bipartisan reauthorization conference report that the President can sign into law. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to support H.R. 3800, the Airport and Airway Extension Act of 2012, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Gentlemen, have any further requests for time?
I think Ms. Norton wants to speak. Mr. Chairman, we have one speaker.
You guys continue to reserve.
The gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and at this time I recognize a valued member of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, the gentlelady from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton, for 2 minutes.
The gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman from Illinois, and this compromise only reminds me of how much I regret that he has decided to retire. He was such a valuable chair of our subcommittee and member of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. I can only wish him all the good fortune his extraordinary productive years in the Congress have earned him. But I thank both sides of the aisle for this short-term extension. Short-term, I am assured, to wrap up some details. This is a bill that is really a great deal more bipartisan than it would appear. Yes, there were some tough items, as in any piece of major legislation. I do regret the major reason for the standoff. This bill, it seems to me, could have been before us long ago, but for at least one provision which could have been settled long ago, and that was the provision that in the bill that would have insisted that no-shows be counted in the in labor elections, that no-shows be counted as for one side or the other, and in this case they would have been counted as a no vote to join the union. You know, you could argue just the opposite, that if you really were against the union, you're the ones who show up. So it seems to me that was a thumb on the scale. You don't know how it would come out. And some kind of compromise has been reached on that. I will have to wait on that compromise, but I'm very pleased that we moved ahead on a compromise, because the President has said over and over again he was going to veto the bill if it had that in it. So since we knew it was going to be vetoed, it was up to us to get to a compromise much earlier and get on to a few other tough issues in the bill. And I recognize that more time is needed on those issues. One of those issues, by the way, has to do with just how much traffic you're going to tolerate at Reagan Airport, with the notion if an individual member from the West Coast would prefer the convenience of landing at Reagan, then the whole bill should bend in that way. I ask that we consider, could I ask for 30 seconds more?
Sure. I yield another 1 minute to the gentlelady.
Gentlelady is recognized.
So in winding up the bill, I ask that we keep in mind the fact that a very fragile compromise has been reached to allow the 3 other airports in the region and their economy and their economics to divide up the air traffic as has been allowed. I also want to say that when we get to these union provisions, do remember that in every society, one of the cardinal tests of whether or not you have a free society is whether or not there's a free right to organize. I thank the gentleman for yielding.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Yield such time as you may consume to our colleague from Texas, Representative Fairholt.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to do something that I don't particularly like to do, supporting kicking the can down the road another time. But I'm excited about kicking the can down the road this time. We've had 23 extensions of the FAA bill, but this time as we kick the can down the road, we actually see the end of the road. The Transportation and Infrastructure Committee has worked in a bipartisan manner to come up with a bill that I think is going to be phenomenal. Once we get it out of the House and Senate conferees, it's taken some time to get us to the point where we can find the efficiencies and savings that we need and continue to provide the level of service we expect in our air transportation system in this country. My fear is we're going to come up with this bipartisan bill and it's going to get stalled again, though. As we stand here on the eve of the State of the Union address, we have the politics of a do-nothing Congress. I hope that that narrative doesn't stop this bill from moving forward as it comes up and we don't have to extend this again. This is something we've been able to do, bipartisan nature. Historically, transportation bills have been bipartisan. Let's not let this get stopped and have to kick the can down the road. Let's get our conferees done. Let's get this passed. I urge everybody, my colleagues, to support this extension. Let's make it the last and get the long-term bill passed for the betterment of this country and everyone in it. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Gentleman from Wisconsin.
Yes, I yield such time as you may
Oh, just a gentleman reserve.
I'll reserve.
We continue to reserve.
I'll yield such time as you may consume to the chairman of the full Transportation Infrastructure Committee, our colleague from the state of Florida, John Knight.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Chairman Petri, our chair of the Aviation Subcommittee. I see Mr. Costello, the ranking member, former chair of the subcommittee. Thank you for your work. We're here to extend the FAA for the 23rd time. The consequences of that can, I hope, be positive, that we can conclude this long overdue and very important authorization. You know, members of Congress, we must authorize every program. That's part of our constitutional responsibility. I had the privilege, when I chaired the Aviation Subcommittee, to write a lot of what was in the last bill, which is we authored in 2003. It expired in 2007. The other side of the aisle had 4 years in which they controlled the body, 2 of which they controlled every branch of government, and were unable to pass that. They passed 17 extensions. We've had to pass, will now be 5. But we can get this done. This should be a bipartisan and must be a bicameral jobs bill. The aviation industry in our country accounts for between 7 and 8% of our gross domestic national economic activity. And for us not to have passed authorization that updates the safety, all of the programs, the next generation of air traffic control, things that are so important to have a dynamic industry, and then an area of our economy that we have led in the world. The biggest area of exports is aviation. That's huge for jobs in this country. So this is going to be the last extension. It's done in, again, a bipartisan effort to conclude the negotiations. And let me say in conclusion, there are some tough issues on labor that have held this up. 4 years with the Democrats, the last year with us. And I want to commend Speaker Boehner for his leadership, working with the leadership of the Senate. The Speaker and his staff and others have worked day and night through the holidays and right up to now to conclude what I think is a very fair compromise. And it must be a compromise. This is a part of our business is to do the best business we can for the American people, and getting this economy working and getting in place the framework for one of the most important aspects of our industry. If we want to see Americans back to work, we'll pass this legislation by the 17th of February, and then we'll come back and the next week or two, and we will pass a long-term infrastructure transportation measure, and we will and we can get Americans working. So with that, I yield back and ask for continued cooperation to complete this important process.
Gentleman from Wisconsin.
I have no further request for time and reserve the balance of time.
Gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, let me commend Chairman Mica and Chairman Petri for working in a bipartisan way. We've attempted to work with the other body in working out an agreement. We are very close to an agreement. As I said in my statement, I reserve judgment on the final conference agreement, but I certainly want to commend our friends on the other side of the aisle for working to move this legislation forward. And with that, I urge passage of this legislation and yield back the balance of our time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Wisconsin.
I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 3800? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Oh, wait a second. They're waiting for the Republicans. Are you waiting for your time? They're waiting for the Republicans. Speaker.
Does the gentlewoman from California rise?
Mr. Speaker, I have a motion to instruct conferees at the desk.
The clerk will report the motion.
Ms. Capps of California moves that the managers on the part of the House at the conference on the disagreeing votes of the two houses on the Senate amendment to the bill H.R. 3630 be instructed to file a conference report not later than February 17, 2012.
Pursuant to Clause 7 of Rule 22, the gentlewoman from California, Mrs. Capps, and the gentleman from New York, Mr. Reed, each will control 30 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield myself 5 minutes.
Gentlelady is recognized.
I rise today to offer a straightforward motion to provide certainty to American families and businesses. As we all know, late last month, after a lot of drawn-out drama, we enacted a short-term extension of the payroll tax cut, of unemployment insurance, and the so-called doc fix. All these provisions were set to expire at the end of last year. Payroll taxes would have gone up on 160 million American workers. Millions of unemployed people would have had their benefits cut off even though they still can't find work. And doctors would have faced huge cuts in their reimbursements from Medicare, making it harder for seniors to see a doctor. The 2-month extension was not ideal, but differences could not be resolved before the clock ran out. Now with this short-term extension set to expire in just a few weeks, we must find a way to bridge our differences and enact a full-year extension of these provisions, and we need to do it as soon as possible. And that's what this motion is about. It simply directs the conferees to finish their work by February 17th, so both the House and Senate will have time to vote on the final package before clock runs out on the 29th. Just a date certain to ensure that we get our work done without yet another last-minute scramble. We have a habit in this Congress of leaving our work to the last minute, something we should have learned when we were kids, when our parents warned us about this long ago. Last year, for example, was filled with manufactured crises and last-minute deals. It led to a great deal of uncertainty about everything from tax policy to whether or not America will pay its debts. And this uncertainty has affected our economy and our efforts to create jobs. I know we can do better. I know we must do better. Our economy is still in a fragile state, and we must not add to its precarious nature with yet another unnecessary dust-up here in Washington, and especially not about provisions we generally agree upon. For example, extending the payroll tax cut for 160 million Americans will put $1,000 more in their paychecks for this worker in this coming year. In my home state alone, that would put $21 billion into the pockets of 17 million Californians. That's real money for consumers to spend quickly at small businesses across the country, stimulating demand and growing our economy. Now, economists from both sides from every perspective agree that this payroll extension is critical to maintaining our recovery and critical to extending new jobs. In addition, there is a general agreement about the need to extend unemployment benefits. This affects about 4.5 million Americans who would lose their unemployment benefits if we don't get our work done in time. Never before have we allowed emergency unemployment benefits to expire while unemployment remains so high. Millions of middle-class workers and their families depend upon emergency unemployment benefits to feed their families, to put gas in their cars, to keep their houses warm. Once again, extending these benefits helps create jobs, helps to grow our economy. According to Mark Zandi, every dollar of unemployment benefits creates $1.65 in economic demand. That's not rhetoric, it's a fact. And finally, Mr. Speaker, we all agree that the need to ensure our doctors don't see a draconian cut in their Medicare reimbursements. Such a cut would affect the health care of nearly 50 million seniors who could lose access to their doctors if we don't complete our work on time. Without an extension, Medicare physicians will see nearly a 30% increase, reimbursement cut at the end of this month. And of course, this is something we face every year, which is why I have always supported a permanent fix to the SGR. But at a minimum, we must include a full-year fix for this program. Failure to do so will harm not only our doctors and their employees, but our seniors as well. Mr. Speaker, the American people are rightfully tired of the political games and needless brinkmanship that has become all too common in this body. I say it's time to change course. Let's begin this new year on a better note. Let's begin the year by putting aside our differences and working together. Let's complete the new year. Let's begin the new year by completing the work that we all were set here to do. And let's do it on time and without unnecessary drama. And let's begin the new year by helping middle-class families and small businesses stay afloat in these tough times. It's way too important to wait until the last minute. Millions of American workers, business owners, and families are depending on us. The time to act is now. I urge my colleagues to support this motion to ensure that we get our work done on time, and I reserve my time.
Gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in great agreement with my colleague from California on the other side of the aisle. What she has articulated before us in this chamber, Mr. Speaker, is an instruction to the conferees, of which I am one, to get our job done. I wholeheartedly agree with that sentiment. And also, there's a tremendous amount of agreement when it comes to the payroll tax extension, to get an extension for at least a year, to extend unemployment benefits, and also to do what we have to do in Washington, D.C. in regards to our providers under Medicare with our doc fix. We have proposed and passed in this chamber before the end of the year a one-year proposal on the payroll tax extension, fully paid for, a two-year proposal on our doc fix, fully paid for. Those are long-term solutions that have been offered by our side of the aisle, adopted in a bipartisan fashion before the end of the year, and sent to the Senate to act upon. The reality of the situation finds us in a position where the Senate has not done its job. And my colleague from California is correct. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that the Senate ran out of time and they reverted to classic old political ways of doing business, passing legislation at 3 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, waiting till the last minute, and putting forth a product that only allowed us to kick the can 2 months down the road. We can do better. We need to do better. And the proposal that came out of this chamber was a start in that right direction. And it is time that we join together and we hit this long-term solution put forth for the American people, because they deserve no less. You know, I would be remiss if we did not identify the fact that we as conferees were here over the Christmas break. We were here trying to champion the cause for making sure we put policy into law, not achieve political gamesmanship or wins. It is time for us to focus on policy and put politics aside. Hardworking taxpayers deserve that today in America. And I, for one, will join my colleague on the other side of the aisle in the tremendous amount of agreement that I think we have going into this conference, and the sentiment of getting the job done in time, not waiting till the last minute, coming up with a long-term solution of at least a year on our payroll tax extension, at least 2 years for our doctors who are getting reimbursed under Medicare, and take care of the unemployment situation. But I would have to disagree with my colleague on the other side of the aisle when she says that unemployment benefits are some sort of economic stimulus that should be expanded. I understand and I have read what the economists have said on the economic impact of unemployment benefits. But my point would be, if that logic was true, then why don't we just extend unemployment benefits to every American and sit back and watch the economy blossom? The fundamental truth is, and it's time to be open and honest with the American people about it, is that the economy is not going to strengthen based on government expansion, government spending. It's going to strengthen on a commitment to small business America, laying the foundation upon which the private sector knows that there is certainty, there is confidence in the market, and they have the ability to know what the rules are going to be for years to come, not on a month-by-month basis. And I urge my colleagues in the other chamber, in the U.S. Senate, to heed that fundamental message. We can no longer, in Washington, D.C., believe that short-term policy is the best we can do for America. Hardworking taxpayers deserve better than that, and small business owners across America need to know what the rules are with certainty and for years so that they can make the investments to put our hardworking taxpayer Americans back to work. That's what we stand for on this side of the aisle, and that is what I am hopeful going into this conference we will be able to produce out of this payroll bill, unemployment extension, and our doc fix. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlelady is recognized.
I'm pleased to yield, Mr. Speaker, to my colleague from California, Barbara Lee, 2 minutes.
Gentlelady from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank the gentlelady for yielding and also for your tremendous leadership. Mr. Speaker, I rise to encourage all of the conferees on H.R. 3630 to fully consider the chilling effect on the economy of any failure actually to fully extend unemployment benefits. While we are all pleased to see the economy slowly improving, unemployment rates continue to be unacceptably high. And yes, there are 4 individuals looking for every 1 job. This job recovery still has not created enough jobs in our country. I have participated in many job fairs in my district along with the Congressional Black Caucus, and we have witnessed thousands and thousands and thousands of people lining up for the jobs that existed. People want to work. It's not that people are sitting around waiting for their unemployment benefits. If there were jobs, people would work. And so we need this bridge over troubled waters until we figure out a way to create the jobs that people deserve. We must immediately extend all expiring unemployment benefits. The conferee should also strongly consider adding an additional 14 weeks of Tier 1 unemployment benefits for the millions of 99ers who have completely exhausted their benefits. We don't remember that even with the extension of unemployment, there are between 2 and 3 million people who will not be eligible because 99 weeks is the limit. And so we can't abandon those individuals. We have to pass, and we're asking for Congressman Scott's bill and my bill, H.R. 589, to be included in any final legislative agreement. And so, Mr. Speaker, I'm really pleading for this body to really understand that until we figure out a way to create jobs, people want to work, and that it's our moral responsibility to create this extension of unemployment benefits to include an additional 14 weeks for people who have hit the 99-week mark. That's our duty and our responsibility, and I hope that you'll put this in our package. Thank you again.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask to yield myself so much time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to respond to my colleague on the other side of the aisle who just spoke in regards when it comes to unemployment benefit extensions. What we have to do, in my opinion, is set the framework upon which jobs in America could be created. And we just had an example of this last week that I so hope our President tonight in this very chamber comes and explains his decision to reject American jobs being created through the Keystone Pipeline. Because there is a project that has been identified, and it will be implemented in a way that would create an immediate 20,000 new jobs for men and women in America. That will go a long way to solving our unemployment problems in the United States, not just extending unemployment benefits. But as we take up the issue of extending unemployment benefits, we need to do better. We owe it to hardworking taxpayers of America to come up with solutions and reforms in our unemployment benefits programs that gives them the tools, the resources to be reemployed. I agree wholeheartedly with my colleague on the other side of the aisle that I don't believe the majority of Americans want to be unemployed. They want to get back to work. So in our reforms that were passed in this chamber before the end of the year, we talked about things as requiring GEDs, high school education equivalency diplomas, high school degrees, so that people could have that basic educational benefit that will give them the tools to get back to work. We should be focusing together in a bipartisan manner, Democrat and Republican, on reforms that are going to give those tools to our unemployed Americans rather than just giving a check. There's an old adage that I grew up with, being the youngest of 12 children, that was passed on from generations in our family. And that was, you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. You teach a man or woman to fish, you feed him and her and their entire family for a lifetime. That is the mantra, that is the foundation upon which we should take up unemployment extension in this conference and join hands to implement going forward. And again, I have to highlight the fact that what we see out of the other chamber in the United States Senate is a willingness to just achieve what is politically possible, to only achieve what could be called a political win. It is time to stop focusing on politics. Hardworking taxpayers in America deserve us to focus on good policy. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentlelady from California is recognized.
I'm pleased, Mr. Speaker, to yield 1 minute to our colleague from California, Lynn Woolsey.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to support the CAP's motion to instruct conferees. This issue is just too important to get tied up in election year politics. Failing to extend the payroll tax cut, unemployment insurance, and the Medicare docs fix will have real and lasting effects on our nation's middle class. It will mean that fewer doctors will be available to care for seniors and the aging baby boomer generation. It will mean that people who have lost their job through no fault of their own will have the safety net pulled out from under them. And it will mean that working families will see their paycheck shrink. Americans don't want partisan gridlock. They want jobs, they want economic security, and they want access to health care. I urge my colleagues to support the CAP's motion and put our families first. I yield back.
Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlelady from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased at this time to yield 2 minutes to our colleague from Florida, Kathy Castor.
Gentlelady from Florida is recognized for 2 minutes.
Well, I thank my colleague, Representative Capps, for yielding time and for your great leadership on behalf of middle-class families across America. I rise to encourage all of our colleagues to get to work on middle-class tax relief and also take this opportunity to strengthen Medicare. We're going to have a lot of debates over Medicare here in the coming year, but this will be an opportunity to address a real shortcoming in Medicare, and that is protecting our parents and grandparents and the ability that they have to see the doctor of their choice. See, what will happen if the Congress does not act is there will be instituted very harsh cuts to the reimbursement rate for doctors that take care of our parents and take care of our grandparents under Medicare. We simply can't let this happen. Democrats are interested in a permanent fix to these Medicare cuts to doctors. This is vitally important for tens of millions of our parents and grandparents all across America. And you better believe in the state of Florida, where we have 3.4 million seniors that rely on Medicare, we want to ensure that the ability of the doctor that they trust, that they see time and time again, will be there when they make that appointment in the doctor's office. We're interested in a permanent fix. We think working together, we can get this done. Medicare is that promise that has been made to generation after generation of Americans, that it will be there no matter what happens, how hard they work, what happens in their lifetime. Medicare will be there to serve them, and we need to ensure that the doctors are there on the front lines to take care of our parents and grandparents as well. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, I'm heartened because as the gentlelady spoke, I came to the conclusion we're in full agreement. House Republicans are in full agreement. So that gives us hope, ladies and gentlemen. That gives us hope going into this conference that what we're going to be able to put together with the doc fix and how our providers are paid under Medicare is a solution that will be a long-term solution to this situation that politically is required to go through all the time because of this doc fix situation we find ourselves in. But I would remind this chamber, and I would remind all my colleagues, that we are in the midst of a fiscal crisis in this nation that needs to be respected. And that as we talk about making sure that our providers under Medicare are taken care of on a long-term basis, we need to go into this discussion with our eyes wide open. And that is that fiscal crisis forces us to cover these costs. For us to be responsible in Washington, D.C. for one time and pay for what we are doing and live within our means. And that's what our proposal for 2 years out of the House chamber before the end of the year, passed by a bipartisan fashion, did. Took care of 2 years of the doc fix, fully paid for and offset. And what we need to do is bring that attitude into the conference to get it taken care of. And I so heartily agree with my colleague and the esteemed lady in her position in coming up with a long-term solution for our doctors under Medicare. But we do need to be responsible, and we have to offset and make sure that it is paid for. That is the reality of the situation we find ourselves in America with the fiscal crisis we now face, and it will be the reality of our nation's fiscal prosperity going forward if we so choose to honor it. With that, I continue to reserve.
Gentleman reserves. The gentlelady from California is recognized.
I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to our colleague from New Jersey, Mr. Andrews.
Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 2 minutes.
I ask unanimous consent.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we hear that there is agreement over some basic principles here. Just about everyone thinks we should extend the middle-class tax cut for the rest of this year. Just about everyone thinks that we should make sure doctors don't see a nearly 30% cut in the payments they receive to take care of our seniors and disabled persons under Medicare. Most of us think that unemployment benefits should be extended at a time when there are 4 people unemployed for every 1 job opening in the country. most people believe that most, if not all, of this should be paid for. That is to say that we shouldn't borrow the money to do these things. The amount of money that's needed to do that is about $3 out of every 1,000 that we're going to spend here. That's significant money, but it's $3 out of every 1,000 that we spend. So here's the idea behind this motion. Since there's such broad agreement that this middle-class tax cut and the other provisions need to happen, since there is such broad agreement that it ought to be offset at least in part, if not fully, and since it's such a relatively small amount of money, $3 for every 1,000 we're going to spend, let's not wait till the very last minute to do it. The history of 2011 is littered with the majority waiting until the 11th hour. And it was more than just an inconvenience for the legislative process. In August, when the markets melted down, it turned out to be a crisis for the country and the global economy. Let's not take that chance again. So if everybody is so much in agreement, vote for this motion. What it says is let's not wait till February 29th. They gave us a leap year this year, so let's not stretch it. Let's not wait till February 29th at midnight. Let's get this done no later than February 17th to get this done in an orderly fashion. The American people are tired of a Congress that has the study habits of a student who parties all semester and crams for the finals. Let's get serious, let's grow up, and let's vote for this motion.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do have to remind my good friend on the other side of the aisle that on December 22nd, House Republicans were here. We were sitting in the conference ready to get to work, and conferees on their side of the aisle had not even been named by that point in time. I was here over the New Year's break, Thursday, Friday, working on this issue in preparation for the conference. Where was the Senate? Nowhere to be found. So let us be straight with the American people. Let's be open and honest with the American people that who's ready to do the work is us. In the House chamber, on the House Republican side, we demonstrated it at the end of 2011 by staying here. We may have been hurt politically or lost that political battle, but you know what? The American people want us to do not what is politically the winning strategy, but what is the best policy for the American people. And that's what we stood up for. Maybe that message didn't get home to the men and women back in our districts immediately, but I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, when I went back in my district and I had the question presented to me at my local church, local grocery store, why were you still down there? What was the problem? What were you fighting for? And we went through the details of the policy that we are talking about here with the payroll tax rates, the unemployment extension, and Medicare reimbursement for our providers under Medicare. And they said, well, obviously you needed to stay there to get it done. And that's what we have to do. We have to adopt the attitude of we have been sent here to do the people's work. It's time not for us to wait till the last minute. I wholeheartedly agree. But it is also time that we do not just leave town because we accomplished what was politically possible or what was in our political interest. I wholeheartedly am committed to finding the real solutions, the real policy initiatives, and that is what we're standing for on this side of the aisle. And with that, I continue to reserve, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman reserves. The gentlelady from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, could I inquire how much time remains on each side?
18 minutes remains on both sides.
Each side?
Each side has 18 minutes remaining.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to yield 2 minutes to our colleague from Connecticut, Mr. Courtney.
Gentleman from Connecticut is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of the CAPS motion, which, again, says that we should move as swiftly as possible to resolve all of these issues. And in support of that, I just want to share with the body a survey was released by the Connecticut Medical Society a few days ago. It's the largest physician group in the state of Connecticut, asking what the impact would be if the SGR 27% rate cut went into effect. It would be catastrophic. 40% of doctors would stop accepting Medicare patients. 10% would close their practices. 32% would lay off staff. But what was interesting is that 19% said that they are already refusing to take new appointments of Medicare beneficiaries and are curtailing access for both Medicare and TRICARE patients all across the state of Connecticut. So clearly, this is not an issue which can wait to the last minute. People are already voting with their feet, and it's affecting access to health care literally as we sit here today in the House chamber. I also would just like to remind the gentleman from New York that the measure which the Republicans passed in December, which supposedly addressed this issue, paid for the SGR fix by taking $40 billion out of the hospital accounts in Medicare. So in the name of protecting physician fees, they butchered the other part of the system, an essential part of the system, in terms of hospital access, which provides emergency care all across this country. And the American Hospital Association and others clearly warned this chamber and the Senate that this cut would be extremely damaging and catastrophic to the American healthcare system. And the fact that the Senate did not just rubber stamp what the House did, in my opinion, shows that they acted appropriately. It is extremely urgent for the American healthcare system that we pass and follow the CAPS motion's timeline to fix this issue. Frankly, an issue which has festered since the 1990s when the Republicans passed the SGR formula. This is not part of the Affordable Care Act. In fact, at the time we passed the Affordable Care Act, abolished SGR with H.R. 3662. We should follow that path at the end of the day, and we should certainly follow the timeline of the CAPS motion. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I so appreciate my colleague reminding me of the offsets on the doc fix bill. And I would just like to remind my colleagues on the other side of the aisle in this entire chamber that the House passed bill that was sent to the Senate, 90% of those offsets were recommended and supported by the President of the United States, President Obama. Now, I'm not saying that that's the final thing that we can agree to. By no means am I saying that. But what I will say is that we did our work, found common ground with the President's own recommendations and policies that he supported, and sent it to the Senate. And at this point in time, I still remind the American people, who is at the table? The House. Where is the United States Senate? And I remind the Speaker and the American people, I say the entire Senate, but in particular, those on the other side of the aisle. For that, I continue to reserve.
Reserves. Gentlelady from California is recognized.
I'm pleased to yield, Mr. Speaker, 2 minutes to our colleague from New Jersey, Mr. Pascrell.
Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In just a few hours, the President of the United States will be on the floor to present his ideas as to how we can grow our economy and put the American people back to work. I hope the majority keeps an open mind, rejects the extreme ideology and political timidness that has driven the 112th Congress of the United States. Need I remind my friend from New York State, need I remind him that the tax cuts of 2001 and 2003, as we move into this next decade, are the biggest cause and the biggest proportion of the deficit facing this Congress. And you are not going to nickel and dime us to solve the problem of the deficit on the backs of the middle class and the working poor. It doesn't work. You can't figure it out. While the economic indicators are showing pretty good improvements, the unemployment rate in my home state of New Jersey still 9.1%, above the national average of 8.5%. Because of games played by the extreme wing of the Republican Party, the payroll tax cut that President Obama and the Democratic Congress support is at risk of expiring again. Now, I can't say any clearer than this. $1,000 may not be a lot for millionaires like Mitt Romney, paying a 13.9% tax rate, but it is a significant amount of money directly in the pockets of middle-class families in North Jersey. You don't have to look far to see where we are still hurting. Just last month, the construction industry, Mr. Speaker. Unemployment rate jumped from another 3% to 16%. Passing the payroll tax cut will help grow the economy, get the American people back to work. Isn't that what we want? And with that, I yield back to you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for giving me the courtesy of allowing me to speak. Thank
Gentleman
you,
yields back. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to yield 1 minute to my good friend from Missouri, Mr. Long. Thank you.
Gentleman from Missouri is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to address the issue of the payroll tax extension, holiday, whatever you want to call it, and the doc fix that we address every single year here in this Congress. At the end of last year, we went home. We did our work. We extended the payroll tax holiday for 1 full year. We did the doc fix for 2 years. Then I got to the airport in Dallas, Texas, and got a call that the Senate had sent back over a bill here that was going to pay the doctors, taking care of our seniors on Medicare for 2 months. I think if I remember right, they had 3 different plans. It would either take care of for 2 months, 8 weeks, or 60 days. That's the only 3 programs they looked at the Senate. Then they sent it back over here, and then they try and blame us, saying we're not for the payroll tax extension. We were for it for a year. We were for the doc fix for 2 years. And I think it's ridiculous that the Senate cannot do their work, just like we haven't had a budget out of the Senate in 1,000 days. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from California is recognized.
I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to our colleague from North Carolina, David Price.
Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the motion to instruct and want to thank our colleague from Santa Barbara for offering it. Last year, as we lurched from one congressionally created crisis to another, uncertainty plagued families and businesses, and the American people's confidence in our ability to do their work plummeted. In the first few months of the new year, we can right these wrongs. We can proceed in a deliberative, mature manner to address our nation's problems. As the President will reiterate tonight in his State of the Union address, this is a make-or-break moment for our economic recovery, for our middle class, and those trying to reach the middle class. Extending this payroll tax cut will put an average of $1,000 in the pockets of workers this year. Let's not play games by threatening to raise taxes on 160 million workers if you don't get your way on one bargaining chip or another. We should pass a full-year extension of the payroll tax cut right away and then move on to the President's broader jobs bill that would create jobs and put us on a faster road to recovery. Now yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back.
I reserve.
Gentleman from New York reserves. The gentlelady from California is recognized.
I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to our colleague from New York, Mr. Crowley.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my friend and colleague, Ms. Capps, for yielding this time and for spearheading this resolution, which will simply end the dog ate my homework excuse my Republican colleagues have repeatedly used when refusing to do more than the bare minimum that our job requires. I'm the father of 3 children, all under the age of 13. My kids are the best. I love them dearly, but they are like most. They don't like doing their homework, and they often wait to the last minute to get it done, despite my wife and our best efforts to see otherwise. While this behavior is common in households across America, it is not acceptable in the workforce, and it ought not be acceptable here in the halls of Congress. Yet this is how the Republican leadership has gone about our business here in Congress. This Congress almost let the United States of America default on its bills. This Congress almost prevented Social Security checks from going out to every American senior because they wanted their way or the highway. This Congress almost refused to pass a middle-class tax cut for Americans before the holidays because they didn't believe middle-class Americans deserved one. And here we are today. The majority has refused for weeks to even begin discussions on the payroll tax, even though Democrats named their conferees several weeks ago and have been ready to talk ever since. President Obama has been waiting for any word from my Republican colleagues. He's made clear he wants to talk, negotiate, and get this done. But the Republicans have clearly been in no rush to get a tax cut passed for the middle class. Today, With the passage of Ms. Capp's resolution, that will all come to an end. The middle class will go to the front and center of this Congress, and it's about time. We cannot wait until the last second once again. We have the chance to pass a bill that will provide the typical American family earning $50,000 a year over $1,000 in tax cuts. Tax cuts they will see in every paycheck. Could I have an additional 30 seconds?
I yield 30 seconds to our colleague.
We have the chance to ensure that doctors treating seniors on Medicare can continue to do so without having to charge them higher fees for medical care. We have the chance to continue unemployment benefits for those who lost their jobs by no fault of their own and are actively looking for work. The majority has a simple choice today. Pass this resolution and make it clear to it's our shared goal, Republicans and Democrats alike, to help hardworking Americans who are struggling in this economy, or reject this bill and continue playing the same games that have become the hallmark of this do-nothing Congress. The fact is the American people don't have time for these games anymore. Stop the games. Pass this motion to instruct conferees, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Chairman yields back. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you.